we can see, for example, robots walking around now, and they're pretty good, right? And they're only going to get better. And we also see what automation can do in terms of information gathering and in creating information, creating content, etc. And again, that's only going to get better. A lot of people will look at their jobs and say, this is something that I'm doing right now, but now it's a ChatGPT prompt, you know? So this is happening. And so there's going to be a clear impact for but we also shouldn't lose perspective. So this is not the first time that this has happened, right? So when Excel sheets came out, for example, there was a lot of people whose jobs it was to create a pivot table, essentially, right? And then that was automated. Yeah. So what happened to those people? So it's not the first time that it's happened, but this is obviously bigger than creating pivot tables with Excel. But there's a better example. Let's look at it from a sociological perspective, okay? Because this is something I have been thinking about, and I think it's really important for us to have this discussion and have it in a way that's going to be productive for us. So probably the biggest change that ever happened in terms of automation is not now. It was what happened when we went from a mostly farming society to an industrial society. So at some point, 80% of people, 90% of people were farmers.
Okay. We're talking like
200 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're talking about the West, let's say. And then at some point, those people stopped being farmers and they started being something else, right? Because automation happened, farming got automated to a large degree, and then we got industries and we got much bigger cities. It allowed us to have much bigger cities, and then we had lots of work in cities. Yeah. And so we did end up having other work. It's not like work went away. And no matter how much more productive we became, work stayed. But something changed. And this is important, right? Something did change when we went from a mostly farming society to an industrial society. We went from a feudal society to a capitalist society, essentially. And I mean, these are like certainly Marxian ideas in a way, because the material conditions changed so much, it was more effective for us to organize ourselves in a different way than we used to. And so it's very likely that something like this is going to happen again. But it's not doom and gloom, right? It's a choice. I'm not of the opinion that these things are deterministic. I think we get to choose what kind of society we want to live in and how we organize ourselves. I don't think social hierarchies are going away. I don't think, for example, private property is going to go away. But there are going to be changes. And what are those changes? And I think that we have to negotiate that with each other and figure out where we're going to go. Because we could end up like in a dystopian society, or we could end up in a Star Trek version of things, or something else. Like maybe the current way of production and the fact that AI is going to do a lot of things for us will allow us to become nomads again, right? And maybe the nomadic life will come.
All right,
back.
That's like way too much to unpack. Let me break this down a bit. Yeah. It's not changing one aspect. It's not like horses and cars. It's like everything's changing. Every industry, how we operate, how we connect with each other, everything's is not the same anymore. A couple of years ago, a few people knew how to use ChatGPT when it first came out. A couple of months later, we had our parents use ChatGPT. Yeah. And now, I don't think anyone doesn't use some kind of LLM. Right. So the fact that it's evolved so much, it's very difficult to think of how we're going to restructure society the way you're talking about it. I mean, I feel like it's a lot more complicated, and maybe we don't have a say in it.
I honestly, for me, I do feel we do have a say in it, but not any individual person. I think that it's going to be determined on how we talk to each other about what we're going to do in the new world. In this new world, for example, and again, let's not go too much into the hyperbole of it. Right now, these algorithms. So let me tell you what I think of these algorithms. Okay, so I mostly think of LLMs, but also machine learning in general, as index search algorithms. And what I mean by that is that they take pieces of information, they index it in a certain way, they place it. So for example, let's say they put, if you're indexing images, they'll put images of like dogs together, images of cats together, etc. And then you're able to search through it very quickly. So you can add another picture and say, where does this belong? At its core, that's what they're doing. They're creating indexes and then they're searching through them. And this is something we as humans have been doing for thousands of years. So for example, Euclid's Elements, which is very famous, and it's the the geometry book that basically is still taught sometimes, but was taught for like 2,000 years as the basis of math. Essentially what it was an organized way to think about all the lemmas and theorems that were around at the time. And so when you compressed that and made it very digestible, it became something very useful. In medicine, for example, we have Ibn Sina's Qanun al-Tib. And then what happened with that was the same thing. He organized it so that you can search by disease and by symptom and by medicine. So when we organize information, it becomes very useful. And our machines today, like all these LLMs, etc., that's at their core, that's still what they're doing. But they're very fast at it, and they can organize all the information that we have in terms of text. So it's that's where the power comes from. They're so wide. Just in general, when I think about these machine learning algorithms, I've always thought about them as those index search, and it works. And the new things that come out will fit within that model. The question is how much of our own intelligence is index search algorithms, right?
What do you mean?
Like when we as humans do things, how much of it is just organizing information and then searching through it and then repeating it? And how much of it is creative work?
So how much can be imitated by LLMs and how much is, makes us different, which is the creative part.
Exactly. Yeah. So these index search algorithms are somehow, like when I describe it that way, it's fairly simple. Yeah. And you think, no, there's a lot of intelligence behind it. But maybe most of what we call like human intelligence is also just organizing data and searching through it and interpolating. So all of those things are going to change. And we're going to be able to give a machine the ability to think in the way that we do. And so, for example, most of the office jobs today probably will get replaced. But social hierarchies and political hierarchies are, I think, much stronger than just what's on the surface of the level of like what work needs to be done. I think humans are very social animals. We're very political animals. We like to live in hierarchies. We create them all the time, and it's the same thing now. So, like, for example, I'll ask you, where would you want to go?
Now you're making me think about this deeply. I think the concept of there always needs to be a loser for there to be a winner is kind of ingrained into us. Like you have to be better than someone else.
Yes. I think this is one of the biggest driving forces amongst humans, unfortunately.
Yeah. So even when people say, okay, so now we can have abundance, but like you correctly stated, we could have had that thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We had
especially a couple of hundred years ago when 10% of the people could have done all the farming.
So do you see this as a positive thing? Because I believe in capitalism as the driving force of all the innovation. I think without capitalism, without people competing, we wouldn't advance. We would just be like, that's just the way things are.
I agree. I completely agree with you. But I would go a little bit more fundamental. I would say beyond capitalism, it's the fact that we are competing. We do form those social hierarchies and those political hierarchies is what actually drives innovation. I completely agree with you. And I think capitalism gives us a really good system to do that in. And the idea of private property, etc. But it's not the only one. We've tried other ones that didn't work out so well. But we can also try out other ones in the future. And maybe we do have to think about it a little bit more deeply and say, maybe capitalism isn't going to be the answer when we have like physical abundance. Maybe that won't fit the bill, but what will? And we have to kind of negotiate that. But I do think it's a mistake to think, for example, that social hierarchies will go away. And I do also agree with you that social hierarchies are the driver of a lot of innovation, and they can also be fun. And so this is the question that we're coming back to now, right? Which is, given that the material conditions have changed, how exactly are we going to organize ourselves to still keep it fun? When, for example, like I have to spend a lot of time working on my taxes, etc., for my company. And there has to be a lot of government employees who have to work on that as well. And this is something that we can automate, right? And should we automate it, those people won't have jobs, and they might take on different jobs. But I don't like that game. I don't like playing the game of paperwork and taxes. And I don't know if other people do either. So maybe there are other things that we could be doing that are more.
Okay. So let me just refocus this on businesses and enterprise. You implement, last time we talked about a year ago, what I found really interesting is that you're a problem solver at heart. I feel it immediately. Even when I talk to you, you're always trying to figure things out. And that's basically what you do with Tempered AI.
Yes.
And you guys are solving complex problems and trying to implement AI solutions for companies. When you're engaging with those larger companies, do you feel like they take into consideration the human aspect as well that we've been just talking about? Or is it always about the how much time will it save us? How much money will it save us? And do you care as a company, or are you just here providing a service?
Maybe it's different for us at Tempered because we make a focus of putting the problems at the heart and then the problem solvers around it. So we have a certain way of approaching tech, which is maybe a little bit different, and maybe that's giving us a different experience. But to be honest with you, working in these different companies, working with different clients, what I have found is that work has become a little bit more human with all of the AI stuff that's come out. It's become, there's a lot more opportunity. People can feel that there's a lot more opportunity. There's a lot of projects that go in because they're pilots for people to learn how AI works. So it does seem, at least where I'm sitting, that people are very open to trying out new things, and that there's an acceptance that certain projects will fail, certain projects will succeed, and that's all okay. So we're in an innovative phase and a creative phase, and that's actually made things more human, which I really enjoy. Even working with AI projects, you have to have a lot of iteration. So you have to go back and forth, get feedback. The idea before, for example, when we used to do a software development project, we would plan it out from the beginning to end, and you'd have to deliver exactly what you scoped. With AI, what we're finding is like 2 weeks in, we're telling the client that what we originally scoped is something that's not going to work, but there is something else that's going to work and provide even more value than we thought. Or, for example, they're setting up a chatbot over their data, and we'll tell them these are the types of questions that you won't be able to ask, and these ones you will be able to ask. And that training is actually part of the project, as opposed to, for example, pre-scoping and saying, these are the problems it's going to solve. And what that allows us to do is to keep it more human, because we're able to see that the other person on the other side is also just learning these things. And so it becomes this fun learning environment, I think. I mean, for us, it's been a positive in that way.
I kind of feel the same way. I've worked on a lot of these projects, and I feel like it's not black and white. You don't come in and you erase a department. It's the way things go. It's usually you integrate new ways of doing things, and people are eager to learn. They're really excited about it. And at the same time, you mentioned failure. And I feel like it's very important to say that we are still, as you mentioned, experimenting a lot. There's so many tools, so many different solutions. And in some companies, people are just starting AI projects. Let's be honest here. Mm-hmm. Some companies, they just want to have AI in some departments. A new manager comes in, digital transformation, let's put AI here and there. How much of it is real, has a real impact? And how much of it is just people trying things out over 6 months, a year or two, trying to get some kind of ROI?
Yeah, this is a good question. So it's hard for me to estimate how much of it is which. For sure, both exist. I know back in 2023 when we first started out, a lot of the projects that we were working with, like I would say over 80%, were the types of projects where the company was not expecting something in production. They were expecting that their people will learn what AI is, how it works. This was going to be the pilot, essentially. Where then after the pilot, they were going to do an MVP. And then after the MVP, they're actually going to put it into production. And it wouldn't be like one project either. So we would go into a company, and I'm talking about these big enterprises. Yeah. We'd go in and it would be like, we would be implementing one of like 15 other projects that are ongoing with AI. So a lot of it seemed like it was training for their personnel more than actually looking to build a product. And so getting the personnel to understand what might be possible. At least the most forward-looking companies were doing that. Today, it's changed a little bit because...
And before we move on, do you think it actually helped? Do you think that...
Yes, Absolutely.
Like, what would you say was the difference for someone who was on the journey with you, seeing these projects, as someone who had no experience with AI? Do you feel like they now have a certain level of understanding, or they're just more excited about using those tools?
No, they have a certain level of understanding. I think people learned the limitations of these index search algorithms, essentially, and what the current capabilities are. I don't think companies as a whole were learning those limitations in an organic way. The way to learn it was to actually do projects. So in the same way that an individual would have to go sit down in front of ChatGPT, ask questions, and from the questions that they asked and learn the limitations, companies as a whole had to do this with departments for those departments to learn what the limitations were. So I do think that it was very useful to go through this exercise for everyone to kind of learn, is AI going to forecast things for me, or is it going to bring back some information about my past sales, for example? One is much easier than the other one. And to continue with your first question, today it's a little bit different because there's a lot more managed services. So let's say 2 years ago, when we were building a system to answer questions from PDFs, we were designing the entire process. We had a library that we were using to extract the data. We were processing it, etc. But today, it's like you just upload your PDFs and it should answer. And it's not one platform or it's not one app that does that. What our expectation is that every app is going to do that. Like, it doesn't matter what my email service is. Like, they should be able to search through all the images in my emails now, you know? So that expectation has changed. And so now I think we're seeing a lot more things go into actual production because companies are no longer building these things from scratch, but they're relying on managed services.
Interesting. And you're right. Before we were just expecting text. Now if something tells me that I don't take in images or PDFs, it wouldn't be a serious tool for me.
Right? Exactly.
But let me ask you this. I want to talk to you a bit about LLMs. There's been a lot of controversies about some LLMs. You talked about testing the boundaries. And I did for many of them. And what I noticed is that one of the most critical point or the critical part of the LLM is what data are you feeding it and what instructions are you giving it at its core. I'm not saying you as someone who's prompting. And the reason why I say this is because if this is a source of information that people now rely on a bit too much, they stop thinking, they stop Googling anything, they just ask ChatGPT, they just ask Gemini. If that's their source of truth and that algorithm is biased in some way or another, aren't you worried about that? Don't you think that this is something that can actually cause a lot of problems in the future? Forget implementing it for enterprise, just the core, the LLM itself.
No, I agree with you. And let's hone in on what that problem is. I think people have friends and they go talk to their friends, and sometimes their friends have very bad ideas. Yeah. And bad ideas are, everywhere. And that's fine. And you can get, really bad advice from a friend or from a stranger, etc. So this was a common thing, even at the beginning of the internet, for example, when we started having like the chat rooms, etc. This was also a danger because you're not getting advice from people you don't know, and you don't know how bad that can be. Today, the danger is a little bit deeper than that, and I think you alluded to it correctly, which is that you have these big companies that have their LLMs, and people will generally rely on one. So if someone's a ChatGPT user and they've paid for that, then that's it. That they're just going to that LLM for information. And not just them, large swaths of society are going to that one LLM for their information. And I do think there's something dangerous in that, because the feedback mechanism that we have, for example, like let's say with me and my friends, etc., if one of my friends is constantly giving bad advice or constantly having bad ideas, they get corrected fairly quickly, and it's just one individual, and then there's a group that gives the feedback, right? But here, how do you give feedback to ChatGPT, right? You can tell it, hey, note my feedback, etc. But they're not going to implement it. They have an
ups and downs that no one ever uses, but
exactly. And even if you do give that feedback, are they going to implement it or not, right? So I think there's a danger in that we're basically people are going to be thinking less for themselves. They're going to be researching less because it's become easier, right?
Yeah.
Because it's become easier to get the information, people are going to trust it more. And I do think there's a danger in that. But I think that's a danger that we can mitigate with proper education. The simplest thing would be that people should use multiple sources, right? Especially if you're looking for
multiple sources as in multiple LLMs?
Multiple LLMs, yeah. And one of the best things that happened was that the open source community did not give up. This is my favorite thing. So in prior tech, the open source community was keeping up with everything, and that was fine. But for example, with operating systems, like Linux and Linux never really caught on the same way that, for example, the Mac OS and and Windows caught on, and they kind of captured the market, right? So the private companies captured the operating system market. But with LLMs, that could have happened too. Like we could be in a situation where there are no open source big models because people don't go out and build these out because it takes a massive enterprise to train the models, etc. That's become cheaper now, but at the same time, somehow the open source community came together and just said no.
Do you think Meta did the right thing, deploying Llama?
Yes. I think that there was a lot of companies who were at the head of keeping things open source, and Meta did a really, really good job on this. But also DeepSeek did a really good job on this. So we had a lot of different open source, and there's a lot of open source communities that came out. Hugging Face deserves a lot of credit because they created a space where these things could happen. So with that, I'm really happy that we have all these different open source models, and so there's a lot of competition. And even if we had, for example, 5 different private models, they could have cooperated with each other to give the same kind of information to people. But when you have like 10,000 open source models, like it's not possible anymore. So I'm really happy about this aspect of it.
Would you say that this statement is correct, that LLMs, they scale bias exponentially?
Can you tell me more?
So let's say that a certain LLM responds to you to a question a certain way. And instead of correcting itself, it's just going to prove to you why it's right, instead of like critically thinking about it.
It depends which ones. I mean, I remember with ChatGPT 4 especially, that was really bad. It was just going to repeat exactly what you said. And I think they've retired it today, actually, because
they're at what, 5.2 now?
5.2 or something, yeah. But the O3 model, for example, that's still my favorite one because that's where I saw the biggest jump in terms of reasoning. When they released the O3 model, all of a sudden it would reason things out, and I would try to lead it into a certain direction because I always like testing these limits, and so I would try to lead it into a certain direction, and it would just basically tell me, no, I'm not buying what you're saying here. And then since the O3 model, I think all the reasoning models have been good. So for example, when I use ChatGPT, I never not have thinking on. It takes extra time, but that's fine because I know I'm not going to get much with the instant one. On a very basic thing, for example, where I'm more or less doing like a simple Google search, I'll do it on instant, but on anything else, it has to be the thinking. The reasoning models are just very different than the instant models.
Yeah, I mean, to touch a bit on the prompt engineering that you mentioned, I think you can actually trick the LLMs in many ways. And people have like some really elaborate prompt. I've seen prompts that are pages long, and they end by saying, if you don't do this, my life is at risk, or the entire world depends on you answering this question. And if you just ask the question point blank, it would have said, no, I can't answer this. So it's still not, there are still ways for you to play around with those LLMs and make them do things or say things they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
So there's always that risk. And let's talk a bit about all those LLMs that exist out there. It's a bit overwhelming, man. I mean, it's so exhausting when I'm like working with Gemini. Let's say this week I'm working with Gemini. And then I'm going to call up my friend. He's going to be like, hey, did you try the Grok released this and ChatGPT did that. There's DeepSeek now. I'm like, man, I don't even want to try all the others. like you said, people get used to one.
And then,
and it just gets exhausting. The reason why it's exhausting is because they're right. Sometimes these others are much better at whatever tasks you're doing right now.
For sure.
How do you keep up?
So I try to follow like a coffee shop model on this one. So I have a favorite coffee shop that I go to, and then I get my coffee, right? Mm-hmm. And if another shop becomes way better, I might switch, but otherwise I'm sticking to this one. And like the other coffee shop might have like a better cannoli, or like they might have a better croissant or something like that. And I might go get that sometimes, right? But I have my favorite coffee shop that I go to, and that's it. And I think for most people, that's probably a good strategy. You pick one that you're comfortable with, that does everything well for you. And then for specific tasks that you want to go somewhere else, you can. For me, that's ChatGPT. I mean, it's since the beginning, it's worked. And I have a series of questions that I give it every time they release a new model to kind of test where it's at. Because it's not just like, for example, how good is this model at the different benchmarks? It's also a question of like, how easy is it for you to use? How good is it for you personally? And then they can stick to that. The good thing here is that coming back to what we're saying about capitalism and competition, is that when you get all the different people who try out different models, and all these models exist, that competition itself creates an equilibrium that I think is a healthy one. I'm not too worried about this.
You want to hear something unhealthy?
Sure, yeah.
I used to get really pissed at ChatGPT.
Okay.
Because everything I said was genius. Like if I told it, I have this, I want to do this, I want to do this that way, it would be like, Antoine, this is such a breakthrough. I'm like, thank you so much. And then I end up, scrapping the project after a couple of days because it didn't even make sense to begin with.
Right.
So I started using different things. Claude is a no BS. It just tells you like it is. It's great at coding, and I don't think anyone can compete with it at coding today.
I agree.
But after talking to Claude about non-coding stuff, I'm like, man, I miss those compliments from ChatGPT. So I went back and I'm like, yeah, I think I want to do this today. Excellent idea, Antoine. So
and turn off the thinking.
Yeah, of course.
That'll be nicer.
Of course. It, in a weird way, it did make me feel good.
It does, yeah, of course.
And I don't know if this is bad or this is good, or like you're kind of, if it's designed in a way to. Do you think it's designed that way to keep people engaged?
Yes, it is. So I would say something else on this as well. It's good to separate the mental from the emotional, and separate the mental labor from the emotional labor. The mental labor aspect of it is those index search algorithms that we talked about. So you should ask yourself in the morning, do I want a machine who's going to do mental labor for me? In which case you want to use one of the reasoning models. Or do I want a machine to do emotional labor for me and validate what I'm saying? And then you can use the other one.
Yeah.
So really it's a question of what are you needing? Are you needing emotional validation versus are you needing for it to reason for you? And those are two very different things. And maybe you can open up two different screens and, get one for the reasoning and get one for the validation.
It's just so tempting being right all the time. But at some point,
it's very productive too. That's the thing. It's effective. It's effective when you have the confidence, when you have the hope, and you're positive.
Yeah, but I feel like it's just like asking your family or friends, and you have this startup idea. It's amazing. It's great. We're backing you up. You can do it. But if you ask the real world, you're going to get real criticism.
Right.
So do you sometimes plug in the same prompt in like 4 or 5 language models and try to figure out which answer you like best?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I use Gemini, I use Claude, I use ChatGPT. I start with ChatGPT. If I'm not getting what I want, then I will move to the other ones. I want to say something else on this as well, actually. For me, the way I use these models, I like to break down the things that I want to do as, for example, a project, and then an outcome. And an outcome is something that I can explain to someone else. So if I have a massive project that I want to do, so for example, you're doing these podcasts, that's your project that you're doing as a whole. Maybe an outcome can be like a specific podcast that you're doing, or something else that's measurable. And then there's tasks that make outcomes happen. And then there's subtasks that complete tasks. So there's a series of subtasks that you need to do to get a task done. There's a series of tasks that you need to do to get an outcome.
I feel like you're describing DevOps here.
Kind of. There's a series of outcomes to get your project, right?
Yeah.
So when these LLMs started, they were at the level of subtasks. That's the only thing they could do. And then they could do tasks. I still don't trust them with any outcomes. So if I'm looking for something bigger, I don't go to them. For example, I wouldn't give a question to one of these LLMs that I wouldn't give to an intern. But you do have to qualify that. If I have an intern who can spend 2 years on a problem, right?
Yeah.
And give me back a result in 5 minutes, what kind of questions will I ask that intern? And those are the kinds of questions I will give to the LLMs. But I don't expect the LLM to reason out the more higher level executive functions of like what it is I need to do with my life, etc. That I leave for myself for now. For now, at least.
I hope so.
Yeah.
No, but I agree with you on a higher level. Like these prompts, I see a lot of videos about them joking about give me a startup idea that will make me $1 million a month and it's easy to build. Like
I think Sam Altman did that basically.
I it's an extreme example, but it goes to something that a lot of people do. They just like ask them, how can I get this whole project completed? Like how can I fix my life basically? And it's gonna suck at this. It really is, because it's probably going to tell you something that will make you feel good, that there's a way to get there, because that's its job. But if you want to get the most out of it, I completely agree with you. Give it specific tasks.
Yeah.
Don't tell it, figure out the world. How do we do world peace? No, it's just like, how do I get from this point to that point?
Yeah, I think so too. That's where I find the most use for it as well.
So we have I just have 2 more questions for you. Do you think that everything we're seeing now is massively overhyped? Do you think that AI now, everyone asks this, is it a bubble? Is it going to pop? So do you really think that all the money that was invested, all the tech companies that exploded over the last couple of years, the chips companies, do you feel like it's justified? Or it's pure FOMO?
No, I think it is justified. I think that the market caps of different companies and the amount of money that's sloshing around is a proxy for that social hierarchy that we talked about earlier and how that's changing. And that is changing rapidly. I think that we are very close to a point where we have to start thinking about how we're going to reorganize ourselves as a society, and AI is doing a big part of bringing that about. And this is humanity as a whole, as a global phenomenon. So, because of that, I do think AI is already a big factor and is going to be a big component of how we're going to reorganize ourselves. And so for that reason, I think the valuations are justified. Of course, there's a lot of unjustified specific examples, but overall, I definitely believe that it is kind of like a momentous time, and these are companies that are revolutionizing the world in a way, so it's justified.
I agree with you, but I think we should be careful about generalizing the success, like the justification of AI. Not every company that has AI in its name is a great company.
100%.
Not every SaaS company
100%
that's out there deploying AI innovation is going to be here in the next 24 months.
100, not even the next 12 months. I 100% agree with you. And I would also add that this change isn't necessarily, like this justification isn't necessarily based on what the AI is currently doing for people, right? So for example, right now, maybe it's writing more code. Is like, for example, for Claude and then writing code. Is that the justification for its valuation? Because that wouldn't be enough, right? Where it is enough is what it's going to do in the future, like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Where is it? Because this is, I have a friend who always says this is as bad as it's ever going to be. It's only going to get better, right? And so I think the valuations are coming from kind of looking into the future and seeing how these things are going to transform our lives. Like, for example, the robotics companies that are currently putting out robots, like they're not that useful. Even like the very, very best ones, they can walk and they can do things, but they're not super, super functional. But imagine a time where, for example, it's better at war than a human soldier, right? All of a sudden you've changed the game, and so the valuation there is going to be there. Or for example, with self-driving cars, but I generally think that's a very difficult problem. I don't think we're solving that in the very near future.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be like, there's going to be like just cars everywhere without any drivers all over the place. Like especially in Montreal, like with our roads and whatnot.
Of course not. I mean, you pick the worst city in the world.
But for example, let's say on self-driving cars, if we get to a point where, for example, trucking goes away as an industry because trucks are going from station to station in an automated way, because that's a problem we can solve today, mostly, right? That's a big impact. And so the valuations are coming.
Where the routes are always the same.
Yeah. So for example, a person can drive a truck to a station, and then from that station, let's say in New York, the truck comes to Montreal and drops it off at another station where then a human driver takes it. Like that we can more or less do today. And I think we're not doing it because it will mess with our social hierarchies too much. And so where I would say with this AI stuff is that, the valuations that you're seeing, I do think they're justified because they're going to change our social hierarchies. But it's not based on the fact that I can do a better Google search now than I used to be able to do 5 years ago.
That was such a great answer. I'm going to think about it over the next couple of days. The concept of social hierarchy now is never going to leave my mind anymore. Thank you, Behzad. So I'll just end with this. A lot of my friends are anxious. A lot of people I talk to are anxious. What would you say to non-technical people that think about this all the time and think about, am I going to have a job? Am I going to be useful to society? What's your answer to them as someone who's in the field?
Sure. I think that there is a lot of doom going around. And there's a lot of optimism going around as well. I think we can ground ourselves in history. The past is a very good predictor of the future. And the example of farming, I think, is the right one. When we were able to feed more people with less work, we chose to come to cities. And life today in cities is pretty good, but during the industrial times, that it was much harder. But people still chose to live in cities. And all over the world, people are still urbanizing because for whatever reason, it's more fun to live in cities than it is to live on farms. And so we do that. And we went through this transformation, and it has its positives and it has its negatives, right? There was pros and there's cons. And it wasn't a heaven and it wasn't a hell. We transformed into something new. And I think the exact same thing is going to happen again now, where we're going to transform into something new, where the social structures are going to change. And it's not going to be all positive. It's not going to be, I can do whatever I want for the rest of my life and never care about anything. And it's also not going to be, I'm going to have to sit in a corner and not have food to eat because a robot took my job. It's going to be something new. There's going to be new social structures.
And I was waiting for that.
Yeah, and I honestly do believe this. I'm a big fan of David Graeber, and I think one of the really important points he made is that we seem to have gotten stuck, and we seem to have forgotten that we make our social structures, and that's something that we all have a hand in. We're part of the process of creation, and so we can think about it that way and think about what we want to create, where we want to go. No individual person is going to decide it. It's not going to be like you can set out a vision and we get there. But in your everyday life, you can think about how do we want to change the social structures. And it's not going to be a flat thing. That doesn't work. It's going to be some kind of hierarchy. But what would be a fun hierarchy? What's the game that we would like to play for the next, for example, 5,000 years? And our generation gets to have a say in that. And that's great, I think.
That's amazing. Amazing. I think we're always going to change. We're always going to chase a challenge. I think that what
I
it
agree.
all boils down to.
I agree. Yeah.
As soon as we
need
get
purpose.
comfortable, we need a purpose.
Yeah.
That's it. So thank you so much for doing this, Behzad. It was super fun.
No, thank you for having me. This was really fun. Always a good conversation with you. Anton.
Amazing. Awesome.